We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Hi Miriam, great to chat with you again. I think it'd be a great place to start in terms of your general background and how the world now knows of Miriam Grossman.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure. And I admire everything that you've been doing across the pond as well. I know you've had some big changes and big accomplishments.
Thank you.
I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm a medical doctor. I went to medical school. I've been in practice seeing patients for almost 40 years. And most recently, I've been only seeing in my practice young people who are confused about being boys or girls, men or women, and their parents, helping the parents navigate this very, very difficult situation. And I recently wrote a book called Lost in Trans Nation, right here.
A great book, if I could say. I've read it, and a phenomenal book and a real eye opener for I think almost any parent or future parent
Thank
should
you.
100% read it.
Well, I saw so much in my practice. I heard so much and saw so much anguish and suffering that I was compelled to write something to warn parents. Because really this can hit any family, conservative, liberal, religious, not religious. No family is immune to this disaster of having a child come home one day and say, Mom, Dad, I'm not your daughter, I'm your son. And what I have learned is that in most cases, well, this used to be an extremely rare emotional condition, extremely rare. Now, what do I mean by that? 20 years ago, there were only 3 clinics that were, that existed in order to help these kids in their families. 3 clinics in the entire world that existed, and those clinics were in Holland, Toronto, and London. Those clinics were small. They only had maybe 10 to 14 referrals a year, in an entire year. And now we have a situation which you're probably aware, for example, the Tavistock, which is, I think it's been totally shut down by now due to the scandal there. But the Tavistock a few years ago was at the point where they had so many referrals. There were over 5,000 kids on the waiting list who couldn't get in. So we have an epidemic, a tsunami, whatever you want to call it, skyrocketing rates of this emotional psychiatric disorder in which a person, now predominantly we're talking about young people, teenagers and young adults, who pretty much out of the blue come out with a declaration. Usually the first thing that they declare is that they are gay or lesbian or bisexual. And then after that, they might declare that they are non-binary, a made-up word that really doesn't mean much. I asked one of my patients, what does that mean, non-binary? And he said, Well, what it means is that you haven't figured any of this stuff out yet. Um, and then after that, the child or the young adult will then declare their identity as the opposite sex. Um, so this used to be, as I said, an extremely, extremely rare occurrence. We usually saw it in two different populations. One was very young boys who might even be preschool, 3, 4, 5 years old. And the other population that we saw it in was middle-aged men, heterosexual men who already had been married, had families, and they typically have a disorder called autogynephilia, in which a man is sexually aroused by the idea of presenting as a woman, is sexually aroused by entering into women's spaces, such as changing rooms, bathrooms, etc. So, and these are completely two different populations, of course. But now we have a third population, and that is the population in which we've seen the explosion of cases. And those are teenagers, and the majority of them are girls, about 60, 65%. We should not forget about the boys, because there are a lot of teenage boys and young men who are caught up in this and who suffer tremendously. But primarily, this is a different population. It's not the kids who have complained about being in the wrong body from a very, very young age. It's not the middle-aged, mostly men, who decide to present as women later on in life. And what we know about this younger population is that they have been massively influenced by their friends, by teachers, guidance counselors, and by the internet. So they have learned about all this through those sources. And that's why in my book, I warn parents about schools, about what's going on. There are activists in our schools that wish to recruit your children. I warn parents and give them instructions about being in control, getting control of your child's internet use, and being aware. This is mandatory. You have to be aware of who your child is interacting with online. Otherwise, it's as if you're sending your child into the most crime-ridden, deviant neighborhood in your city and letting them just walk around and meet people and hook up with them and get to know them and fall under their influence, which obviously no responsible parent would do. And so parents must be extremely vigilant. They must be informed. And my book is for regular moms and dads, not just for professionals, although really everyone needs to read it. Lawyers, teachers, anyone who wants to be informed about what's going on, and really everyone must be informed because it affects all of us. So what I did a few years ago is that my practice became focused on these kids and on their parents. And when I tell you that this is the most difficult work that I've ever done as a psychiatrist, I'm not exaggerating. And I've worked in really difficult settings. I worked for a bunch of years in a forensic psychiatric hospital, which means a place where people are sent by judges who people who have committed violent crimes, rapists, murderers sometimes, who in the midst of their mental illness have committed these terrible crimes, and they have pled they've taken the insanity plea, and so they are sent to a forensic hospital. So I worked with these patients, some of whom murdered their loved ones, their children, their wives, their grandmothers. This was very difficult work, but I must tell you that the work with these kids who are indoctrinated with gender ideology is more difficult.
Wow. What makes it so much more difficult? Because you're dealing with some of the most arguably
Yeah,
vicious people in the world compared to the children. What made that more
right.
challenging?
There's a few things. First of all, when a schizophrenic person goes off their medication and ends up committing a terrible crime, it's because of their schizophrenia. It's a terrible illness. But when a child comes to believe that all their problems, their anxiety, their depression, their self-loathing, their not wanting to grow up, when they come to believe that, and then they latch on to this idea that the problem is that they're in the wrong body, that's a man-made situation.
Right.
That's not schizophrenia or bipolar illness, where someone either the medications weren't working or they stopped taking their medication for whatever reason. Those are mental illnesses. This is man-made. We are indoctrinating the youngest of our children with these dangerous ideas, such
How does the
as,
how does the child get to that stage where, in your eyes, how do they get to the stage where they're now saying they're a boy and they're saying I'm a girl? How have they got to that stage, and is that normal in terms of, there's lots of people who say that it's normal for children to sometimes experiment being the other gender or being interested at least, but for them to overtly say that they think that they're a girl when they're born as a boy, how do they get to that conclusion, and why would they, how are they even then meeting you and
yeah.
you're trying to educate, what are the steps to get there?
Well, okay. First of all, I would disagree that it's normal for any person to wonder if they're in the wrong body and should have been the other sex.
Yeah.
Um, what is normal is you know, to explore the different ways of being a man, the different ways of being a woman. There isn't just one way to be a girl or a boy. There are many ways. And, uh, so there's a difference between the two. There's a big difference. And the proponents of gender ideology have intentionally taken one thing that is normal, for example, a boy that prefers, more stereotypically female uh, behaviors or activities, a girl who is into sports or computers or, math or what have you that are not, stereotypical. And they've taken that normal situation of exploring and not fitting into a rigid definition of what it means to be a boy or a girl, and they've twisted that, and um, and they have turned that into an argument that means that there's a whole spectrum of male and female. No, there's a spectrum of personalities. There's a spectrum of, interests and behaviors and personalities. There isn't just one way of being a girl or a boy. That does not mean that we have more than just male or female with all these different versions. They call it a spectrum, a fluid spectrum that we can move along. That does not mean that a boy who happens to be more stereotypically feminine in certain ways, it does not mean that he's in the wrong body and that he needs to live totally and uh, and get these experimental medical and surgical interventions so that he can present himself to the world looking as a girl, looking like a girl. You see, they've made this massive leap, which is terribly dangerous. Instead of affirming, and this is what parents need to do, I explain in my book, that parents, while they need to make it clear to their children from a young age that they were a boy or a girl from the very first moment that they were created, from the very first second that they existed on this earth, they were either a boy or a girl. I'm not going to get into the intersex. Intersex is 0.05%, 0.02% of the population. We can discuss it later, but for 99.98% of us, we are either male or female. It is established when the sperm and the egg unite. And even before you start telling your kids about eggs and sperm uniting, you can still convey to them that you were always a girl, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And there isn't just one way to be a girl. There's many ways of being a girl. And don't let anyone ever tell you that you're not a girl, because that's permanent. That can't be changed. And then, as kids get older, you can explain that there are people that want to go ahead and try and change their bodies so that they look more like the opposite sex. But that doesn't mean that they become the opposite sex, because that's simply impossible.
Is
So
it?
you asked,
Is that something you would, again, to a lot of people, they may, I've read your book and I've seen a lot of your work, and I couldn't agree more of it. For a lot of people who won't have seen this, a lot of the stuff going on around them, or just not quite as aware as you are, for those people, do you think, why should they be telling their children very early on that they are a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl? Because for a lot of people, a lot younger parents or even older parents, they would never have had to have that problem with their parents. I don't remember my
correct.
dad saying to me, "You're a boy." It was just a given kind of
Yes.
thing. So why now should they do this? Why should I, to my future children, say
Excellent.
this?
Excellent question. And I should have said that as part of my little thing that I just gave you. The reason why parents must do that is because they have to reach their child first,
Right.
before the activists do, before all the messages in our culture that are coming from everywhere. Walk down the street, turn on the television, entertainment, you name it, it's everywhere, right? All these terms, non-binary, cisgender, et cetera, the flags, you see it everywhere. And that's intentional. The activists want to reach your child before you do. So they want to reach the little kids with flags and stories and movies and messages. You must reach your child first. Uh, I can't emphasize this enough. The child has to learn about these things and other things as well. Of course, in our world, there's a lot of messages out there that we want to protect our children from, things that we don't believe in, values that we don't believe in, and this is one of them. So you want to reach your child first. If you don't, I guarantee you that there are, endless numbers of activists that wish to reach your child in every possible way. At school, at preschool, I don't know what you call preschool, kindergarten, at the
Yeah,
earliest.
yeah.
Yeah. And certainly as they get older on the internet, in entertainment, everywhere. So you want to make sure that you reach your children first. Now, you don't have to know the answers to everything. A lot of parents, I think, are intimidated. They're not sure how they're going to answer their kids' questions. And so for that reason, well, first of all, it's okay to not know the answer. All you have to do is say, I'm not sure about that, but I'm going to find out. That's a great question. Hold on to that question. I'm going to get back to you. And then you go to reputable places. For example, my book, my website, and there are many others, not just mine. My website is miriamgrossmanmd.com. And I have a lot of material there, as you said. And parents should not feel like they need to know all the answers at all on any subject. What's more important than knowing all the answers is giving your child a sense that they can come to you. Even if it's a difficult question, even if it's an embarrassing question, you're okay with it. And you may feel a bit embarrassed or you may feel a bit lost in how to answer. That's okay. That's okay. You can be real. And all you need to say is, gosh, I can see that this is really important to you. If it's important to you, it's important to me. And I am going to find out all I can about this issue. And we're going to sit down about it later, tomorrow, next week, and we're going to talk again. It's a process. It's not just one conversation. I also, in my book, I provide parents with model conversations. How do you react? What do you say when your son comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, I'm your daughter. Don't call me Sam, call me Samantha. I need an appointment. I need puberty blockers. I need estrogen. What do you say to that?
That must be a
So
difficult, horrible question. Being a parent, and I can't imagine. I've read your book, and it provides amazing guidance on that example. And it's crazy that your point about entertainment and the culture around children. It seems like almost like every Disney film has aspects of it. I saw something about Transformers, a cartoon for kids, where the robot is saying, "Don't address me as he or she. I'm non-binary," and maybe because I'm a bit more aware, I pick it up straight away, and I'm like, wow, that's concerning. But I think it's worth noting children are just as intuitive, and they can pick up these things so quickly. So how would you, going back to the point of telling the children when explain that they're a boy and that they're a girl, how have we kind of got here as society? Because like I said, I don't think this was maybe is an issue maybe for myself growing up or yourself, and why are we here now? Like why is your book so important? Why is this conversation so important? And why does it affect so many people?
we're here because of a series of lies, a series of fraudulent, um, fraudulent professionals, powerful professionals, fraudulent research that uh, all put together forms the foundation of gender ideology. The foundation is that who you genuinely are uh, is separate from your physical reality. That who you feel yourself to be in what's now called gender identity overrides your biology. That biology can be denied, uh, and that you won't pay a very steep price for denying that biology. So, what do I mean by that? It is, having read the book, you know that it's a pretty long story, but there was the father of all this, the forefather, the founding father of this idea of gender identity is John Money, a psychologist who became very prominent in the USA in the 50s, 60s, 70s as a pioneer uh, in how to help those very rare children that used to be called hermaphrodites, kids that were born with um, ambiguous genitalia. That was his professional interest. And he was interested originally in what should be done for these kids when they're born and for their families. So, of course, this would have been before we started to do amniocentesis, before we did, sonograms where we could establish pretty firmly if it was a boy or a girl, way before birth. And what would happen is that a woman would come in to give birth, and in the delivery room, the genitalia were not clearly male or female. And so that was an emergency. Uh, what do you tell the parents? What do the parents tell the family? How do they name the child? And so on and so on. It was an emergency. So this was John's Money specific interest. And he later he opened the first clinic in the United States, both for these children and for that group of adults, which I described to you earlier, mostly men, who in middle age decided that they would like to live their lives as women. And he opened that clinic in a very prestigious university hospital where he was, Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. Now, John Money was a very impressive man. He spoke, when he spoke, people listened. And he declared that we are all born gender neutral. So the way, John Money said that the way that we learn to be men or women, boys or girls, we learn from society, from our parents, from the messages that were given, the toys that were given, the way that we're dressed, from the expectations that are placed on us. Now, mind you, this is the 50s, the 60s. And he came out with his gender theory, and he said that anyone really could grow up to be a man or a woman. And all that would be necessary is some hormones, some surgery, and that would be a success. You could do that really to any child, because when the child is born, they're a blank slate. Now, of course, we know that is utterly false. And we know that the fetus, the embryo, even before, at developmental stages, even earlier than the embryo, there are differences between male and female. This was not known back then, obviously. So what happened is that John Money became quite famous because of his theory, but he had no way of proving it until a certain family, the Reimer family from Canada, showed up in his office. This is a family who gave birth to twins about a year and a half earlier, twin boys. The boys were normal. They were taken to be circumcised. And one of the twins, the first one that went in to be circumcised, there was a malfunction of the machinery. His penis was completely burnt off. So the other child, of course, was not circumcised. So the Reimers were left with one normal twin, and the other twin had no penis. It burnt off, it fell off. So they were, of course, devastated. This was a very young, blue-collar family. The parents were maybe 20, 22, something like that. They didn't know what to do. They were at a loss. They heard John Money on television spouting his gender theory, saying that a boy could be successfully raised as a girl if the process was started early enough. If the process, meaning what we would now call social transition, was started sooner enough. So they packed up, they went down to see John Money. And Mrs. Reimer, years later, when this whole calamity was exposed, she said that we looked at John Money, at Dr. Money, like he was God. That's
Right.
how impressed they were with him. That's how, and you know, there are similarities to what's going on now. Because in the same way that John Money said to these parents, there's only one solution. And the solution is you have to raise your son as a girl. And if you do what I'm telling you to do, put him in dresses, change his name, don't tell anybody, just he's forever a girl from this moment on, he's going to be fine. And John Money said that as if it was established fact.
Were there no other alternatives? Were the family offered any other alternatives to John Money, or was that
No.
just?
Well, I think that the family did, before going to John Money, they did consult with other people. And there was a variety of opinions. I mean, I believe that they were told by one or two people, to I guess he would, you know, they certainly weren't told by everybody that he needs to be raised as a girl. And they
Right.
certainly weren't told with the with the confidence that John Money told them and led them to believe, oh, no problem. This is what you have to do. This is the solution. Don't even give it any more thought. Trust me, I'm the expert. I'm the person with all the diplomas. I'm the person with, the big name and the big clinic at Johns Hopkins. And so they went ahead and they did exactly what he told them to do. He had some preliminary surgery. He was castrated because he still, the mishap, if we can call it that, with the circumcision destroyed his penis, but he still had his testicles. So under John Money's guidance, he then, had surgery at Johns Hopkins and had his testicles removed and had his genital area refashioned to look more female-like. Then they went home, they put him in dresses, they named him Brenda, and they tried to raise him as a girl. And they gave him, dolls, and they gave his brother trucks and G.I. Joes, and that was their plan. And every year they went down and saw John Money for a visit. Now, what happened is that when the kids reached the age of about 5 or 6, John Money made a public declaration and announced that this experiment was ongoing. I don't know if he called it an experiment, but he said that a boy, a biological boy, is being successfully raised as a girl. And he started publishing articles and being interviewed. And of course, it reached also, into the lay press at Time Magazine and, the New York Times, and really all over the world, that a boy was being raised successfully as a girl. Well, P.S., it was not at all successful. And the truth was, and it came out later, it only came out actually when, I'll tell it in order. So what happened is that Brenda was miserable, was a miserable child, did not fit in, was not happy with her girl identity, used to tear off her clothes, would, preferred to play with her brother's toys, was very aggressive and very masculine. and the kids in her class called her cave woman because the way she spoke and her gestures were very masculine. Now, when Brenda reached adolescence, John Money instructed the family to begin giving her estrogen so that she would start growing breasts. And so that happened. Brenda was extremely distraught. She also, I'm calling her she, but um, also realized that she was attracted to girls, that she was romantically attracted to girls. And at
Did
this
she have
point,
any idea of her? Did she have any idea that that was she was a
no,
boy when she was?
she had no idea.
Wow,
Neither of the twins had any idea.
wow.
Because you see, John Money had told the Reimers that you can never ever tell the twins the truth. That if you do that, you know, uh, you're gonna just mess it all up. It's not going to go well. They can't know the truth. So it was based on a lie. But more importantly, this poor child for so many years had to go through um, the lie of who he was and who he was not. And so he became, at a certain point, suicidal. Um, you know, he had a tremendous amount of social problems, academic problems. The family was suffering. They had to move several times. Um, and they underwent terrible trauma. So the point came when Brenda was suicidal, and her psychiatrist at the time, a very, very wise woman, said to the Reimers, regardless of what Dr. Money told you, and mind you, Dr. Money was the big international expert on this subject. So
Okay.
no one wanted to stand up against him. You know, no, and that has similarities to what happened now also with gender ideology. Who's going to stand up and go against, you know, what the big gender doctors are saying? I mean, now the gender doctors are being sued. Um, so people are getting, you know, stronger, and they're able to stand up and speak the truth and question all of this. But just a few years ago, even last year, you
Yep.
know, people were intimidated. You know, I'm not gonna, I'll lose my job, and anyway, you know, they're the experts. I don't really know about this. They're the people. WPATH, which we might have a chance to discuss. You know, they're the experts. I'm not gonna challenge the experts. So that's, you know, that's what was going on with Brenda as well. But it was, you know, it was in the in the 70s when this was going on. 70s, early 80s.
It seems
Funny.
like you, yeah, points out so many similarities, and even with New York Times and Time Magazine, all these magazines publishing all this information without really checking to see if there's any truth or trying to weigh up the
That's right.
alternatives,
That's
just
right.
accepted as the norm. And I think you could say that's been pretty much the 2000s and 2020s has been practically the same. I think you've been amazing, and a few others who have had the courage to really speak about this. But other than that, it's been widely accepted
Oh,
that.
absolutely. I mean, I first wrote about this in Warn Parents in 2009. I wrote a book in 2009 called You're Teaching My Child What? About sex education. You know, I spoke in the House of Lords about this as well.
Mm.
In 1 minute, in 2011, I believe it was, I was invited to speak in the House of Lords. But in any case, yeah, so there are a lot of similarities of professionals who are intimidated, and they don't step up to the plate. But there was this one psychiatrist in Brenda's life, and thank God she said, no, you need to tell Brenda the truth. And so one day, the parents took the twins aside, told them the truth, and Brenda immediately um, felt overwhelming relief. And you know, he spoke about it years later, and he said that at that moment he knew he wasn't crazy. He all these years and you have to, my heart just goes out to this child who's this innocent kid who's been manipulated. Now, why did any of this happen? Because John Money wanted to prove his theory.
Mm.
John Money used this family, exploited this family, misled this family in order to prove his theory for recognition, for financial gain, and so on. So when Brenda was informed that she was a boy, she immediately went back to living as a boy and took the name David, which was not her birth name. Her birth name was Brian. He took the name David because he felt that for all these years he had been fighting, like biblical David, he had been fighting a giant Goliath in his life. Now, just one more thing here. It's important, two things. First of all, John Money knew about what happened to David. He knew that when David was 13 or 14, he was told the truth, and that, well, even before that, he knew that he was very masculine, more than just a tomboy, that he was not doing well, he was not thriving, he was not socially accepted as a girl. In other words, the social transition of a new name and new clothing and telling everybody, announcing that you're the opposite sex, was a dismal failure. And yet John Money continued to report it a success. Now, at a certain point, he just stopped talking about it. But he never went back, as he should have. He had the moral obligation to stand up and say, listen, everyone, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, everybody, this actually didn't work. This was actually a disaster. And I apologize for having reported this as a success.
You could
John
have saved
Money,
so many lives by doing that. The amount of the impact you would have had would have been astronomical.
yes. Now, David did not come out with his story until he was in his 30s. And the reason that he didn't come out with it until then, publicly come out with it, is he didn't realize that John Money had reported his story as a success. He didn't realize that other kids, other boys, were also being castrated and being raised as girls on the basis of his story. And when he found that out, David, was just blown away. And he said, I have to stand up and say what happened to me. And that's how this story became known. An incredible book called As Nature Made Him, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Girl, by John Colapinto. It's out of print, but you can still get it. Came out in 1999. John Money was still alive at that time, and it tells in all the painful details what happened to this family. Now, P.S., John Money was a very disturbed individual, emotionally disturbed and immoral. He was a pedophile. He was sexually abusing the twins when they were taken down to see him by their parents every year. He damaged the whole thing just damaged this family terribly. Both twins, David committed suicide. He shot himself, and his brother died of a drug overdose. This family was destroyed. But during all these decades before this story was made public, gender ideology became entrenched in psychology, in anthropology, social work, medicine, and this whole idea of gender being separate from biology, that a person can be something other than what their body is, that became entrenched. And that's why we're here now. And it is based on lies. It's based on fraud. John Money's work was fraudulent. So
Why?
that's how we got here.
Again, we're obviously, that we know John Money's a fraud. We know that he's done awful work, and you've very well dissected how bad his work was. Again, so we've learned all of this over the last few years, even earlier than that, but it's still got entrenched into our culture, into our values. Why are still people in the medical profession still subscribing to this gender ideology? I can kind of, as much as I really don't like it when I see people, whether it be my age or my sort of generation, bowing down to this, and when you really debate with them, you talk to them, you can see that the information they have is not very clear. There isn't actually a lot of fundamental belief behind it. For me, sometimes I look at it as almost like maybe a reason, lack of religious beliefs, lack of purpose, and just they adopt this LGBT cult like behavior, maybe more for the non-medical professionals. But why do medical professionals still not fully come out and like how you eloquently are saying? Why is this not like a universally accepted um, philosophy now, theory, that this was just overtly
Okay,
bad?
well, first of all, people don't know. And that's another reason that I wrote the book and everyone has to read it. Lost in Trans Nation. Now, you're giving a lot of credit to the medical profession that they don't deserve. Um, most of medicine is just learning you know, a massive amount of material, memorizing it, and just spitting it out for your exams. It's not, it's not as if you're being taught how to think. It's not as if you're being taught, to question things. The contrary, you're taught not to question. When I was in medical school and doing my residency, um, it was just a matter of, it was, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, all these medical associations, they speak the truth. We turn to them for guidance. We turn to them for our education. Whatever they tell us, that must be true. I'm sad to say. I think that COVID opened up a lot of people to the possibility that perhaps it's not quite valid to think that our medical associations only have that their sole interest is patients and real science and getting to the truth. Um, but and I think that now with gender, slowly, I mean, well, we've had a lot of progress, especially in the past year, um, but we still have a lot of work to do because you speak about the medical professional, which I know best. The language has been taken over. I mean, you get into medical school and they're immediately talking about, um, cisgender and birthing people and people who menstruate and not using the word woman. I mean, it's really bad. It's really bad. So, and many medical students and young doctors contact me and they just say, like, I just, what am I supposed to do? I can't stand this. But if I speak up, I'll be an outcast. I'll be, um, I'll fail the course. I won't get the residency that I want. The doctors in charge will give me a poor grade. I had two pediatricians who contacted me. Um, they're doing their training to become pediatricians, and they're in a state which is a very conservative state. Um, but because pediatrics has been so uh, taken over by gender crusaders, that they couldn't, you know, these young doctors were so upset that they have to sit in the room like with parents. Let's say the parent brings in a child who's confused about who they are, and there's an older doctor, the doctor in charge, the attending physician is there and giving them the whole thing about blockers and cross-sex hormones and blah blah blah. and this is what you have to do with your child, use the new name, use the new pronouns. And they're sitting there knowing that, no, there's other options. There's a problem. That's a path toward harm.
Mm.
That pediatrician is just like John Money, is placing the family on a path toward harm. And these younger pediatricians in training are too intimidated to say anything to these parents because they'll flunk, they'll be thrown out of their program. So this
Yeah,
is what's going on in medicine.
with that example, I think we can look at John Money as somebody who's a almost like a genuinely almost evil person with some really questionable morality. I sometimes worry when it comes to the UK and just generally on this matter is I see a lot of people speak about LGBTQ as if they're doing something that is very virtuous and morally a really good thing, that they're pushing this thing. How do you combat that? Because from my experience, the people who I've spoken to mostly about this, I know some people who I would speak to. Just I'm sure you have people who almost belong to this cult in some way that you would have seen in the media or wherever, and they genuinely believe that what they're doing is a morally good thing for society, and they're not necessarily bad people, but this is what they've been taught, and they're pushing this. How do you combat
Okay.
against?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's separate between the LGB and the T. Okay, because the transgender part of this LGBT involves uh, dangerous medical interventions, and it also involves living. Um, it involves the falsehood that your authentic self is separate from your biology. So this is very, very different than the LGB.
Right.
And I'm sure that you're aware that there are many from the LGB community that want very much to separate themselves from the transgender issue.
Some of the most people who I've met who are the most have the strongest opinions on the T are definitely from
Right,
the
right.
LGBT,
And
100%.
let me just explain something. You see, many of those kids that are identifying as transgender and going down that path are kids that really otherwise would be gay or lesbian. So, and many of the older gay and lesbian individuals say, like, that was me. That was exactly what that kid is right now, that feminine boy, that masculine girl who's attracted to other girls. That was me. And here I am. I'm fine. I'm living a good life. Why are you transing away the lesbian and gay kids? This is a way of, there's conversion therapy, which we won't get into, but this is a way of taking those kids and making them quote unquote heterosexual, which you're not. Of course you're not. I mean, it's all lies. But this is why so many from the lesbian and gay community are very, very passionately upset and against the transgender, what's going on with the new iteration of transgenderism. So, and you see, what happened is why has this transgender ideology been so successful? One reason is because it has been couched within the language and the worldview of civil rights. That it's a civil right issue, not a psychiatric issue or an emotional issue, or it has to do with civil rights. And so they make the claim that when kids are not able to access puberty blockers and hormones, when they're 13 and 14 years old, their civil rights have been breached. So it's couched in a language of civil rights, which is very clever when you think of it, because most people are good. Most people believe that, everyone has a civil right, uh, to certain things. So that's one of the reasons it's been so successful.
In terms of you've alluded to it earlier on, and in terms of what's changed in the last year, since we last spoke, I think there's some positive changes that I've seen definitely in the UK, and I want to touch on what you've seen in the past year globally, and also the potential impact you think a Trump presidency will have on the United States of America and this whole
Okay.
general debate. From
Well, the
the
last
UK
year's
side, it
been very
looks
big.
again.
Well, the
Yeah, so
last
yeah, sorry,
year,
carry on with the.
goodness, yeah, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. We have now in the United States 24, I believe 24 or 25 of our 50 states have passed legislation essentially banning cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery for minors. Uh, and so this is a very, very big accomplishment. What's going on now is that one of those states that instituted that ban, the state of Tennessee, is being taken, is at this in front of the Supreme Court justices. The case was argued last week, and the case involves a number of families who have transgender children, as well as basically the Biden administration joined those families in suing the state of Tennessee for their law about these medical and surgical interventions. So that was heard last week, and it was quite astonishing for me to sit and listen to two of our Supreme Court justices. Um, I mean, just astonishing, the ignorance of these women who uh, who seem to really believe that uh, the whole gender ideology, and seem to believe that these kids who come out and announce at the age of 11 that they're the opposite sex, that we have to put them in the driver's seat, we have to give them whatever they want. Um, it's really, well, maybe it shouldn't be that astonishing, but it is nevertheless. These are supposed to be the greatest minds of our country, mind you. They seem to have done absolutely no research. They did not read apparently any of the briefs that were submitted, something like 40 or so that were submitted supporting the state of Tennessee. But let me get on to some other things. A really big thing that happened also last week is that a lawsuit is being brought against probably the most prominent gender doctor in this country, Joanna Olson Kennedy. She is the medical director of the Center for Trans Youth Health at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is the largest pediatric gender clinic in this country. She is being sued for medical negligence by a young woman who's now 20 years old. Her name is Clementine Breen. And Clementine has brought a lawsuit against Dr. Olson Kennedy, Dr. Scott Moser, and her psychotherapist for essentially rushing her into, at the age of 12, she was put on puberty blockers. At the age of 13, she was put on testosterone, and at the age of 14, she had a bilateral mastectomy. She's now 20 years old. She completely regrets those decisions, and she regrets following the advice of her doctors. And she is speaking up because because the gender industry insists that no one is rushed. They insist that all these kids, they insist that all these kids are very carefully um, evaluated, and that they're, given time and things are discussed, and they're looking at the comorbid psychiatric conditions like autism, depression, anxiety. This particular young woman, Clementine, was sexually molested, sexually assaulted 2 times in her life. And, she began to hate her female body, and they didn't look into that at all. So Clementine, God bless her, decided to stand up, tell her story, and sue those doctors.
Amazing.
So this is a huge development.
And so, do you think that there is being a shift in the United States of America in particular, where we're seeing people stand up to us? Because one of the things I find most disturbing of what you just mentioned was the Biden administration supporting the case of the woman with the trans debate. Is that now changing in America? Where because on the outside it looks like there is a bit more of a shift. I'm seeing more people speak out against it, if you like, on social media since the Trump's victory in November. It seems like more people are maybe saying views that they probably have always had, but now they're saying a bit more publicly. Is that translating in general to the country?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing newspapers that normally would have been completely on the other side of things. The Washington Post, for example, came out with an editorial, um, finally admitting the truth that, that puberty blockers and cross all these interventions on minors are very dangerous, and that we don't have any evidence, as Dr. Cass said, your wonderful Dr. Hilary Cass, who wrote such a phenomenal comprehensive review of gender medicine, said, number one, gender identity changes. And when a child or a young adult comes out and says, my gender identity is XYZ, that doesn't mean that he or she will have the same gender identity next week or next year. That was one of the big conclusions of Dr. Cass. Furthermore, she concluded, after her extremely thorough, along with researchers at York University, thorough analysis of all the data, she concluded that there's no evidence that these interventions in the long term have any benefit. And so, yes, to answer your question, when we see an op-ed opinion piece come out from a place like the Washington Post, that's change. And I have a lot of hope for the Trump administration, but I do want to say this. It is not enough to simply stop the medical interventions. That is not enough. We have to stop the indoctrination. We have to stop this, uh, what's going on in the schools. We have to stop the indoctrination of professionals, social workers, pediatricians, uh, other fields, doctors, therapists, uh, anyone in education. We have to stop the indoctrination that is based on fraud and lies.
And I think that's such a strong point, and I think for a lot of people in the UK in particular, and I think it's similar to America. I think there is that massive fear of speaking out. I see it with friends, family who would share the views that you and I have, and I think the majority of the population, majority of the world has. But it seems to be quite difficult to speak out against it. So the UK has moved. I think made some really good steps in the last couple of weeks in terms of what's going on with this debate. In terms of predictions for the future, are you optimistic with what you're seeing now compared to maybe 2, 3 years ago?
Oh, yes, compared to 2, 3 years ago, absolutely. There's still a long way to go, but it's crumbling. It is crumbling. I do worry for all the families for whom it's either too late, Those families need attention. Those young people are going to need help, medical help. They need, insurance to cover their the treatments that they need to get now because their bodies have been so ravaged by these so-called treatments. I'm concerned about the kids currently still being put onto this pipeline. It's just simply incredible. But you can see there are surgeons. There's a surgeon that's here in Florida. Um, I call her a surgeon, but really she's a butcher, and she performs these so-called gender-affirming surgeries on minors. So she produced I don't know, a TikTok or some sort of something on social media saying, we still have openings. We're making extra openings for you to get in before Trump comes in January and changes everything. You can still get in. Here's the number for my office. Call my office and make an appointment. She's one of the people that is um, removing the breasts of these young girls who are emotionally disturbed. Some of the pictures that are posted online of these girls, you not only see the scars from the mastectomies, but you see the scars from self-harm, or they were cutting themselves, they were burning themselves. So, to answer your question, yes, I am optimistic, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still many countries in which the ideology has the upper hand. I was surprised to read a few days ago that in France, was it France? I think that the authorities are even going so far as to remove children from families that are not um, buying the narrative and not, calling the child by a new name. Um, yeah, it was France. Even though medical community in France did come out with a statement urging great caution. So there is a lot of work to be done, um, and and it needs to get out there. So again, uh, uh, and I want to mention that aside from my book being available as a regular book, you can also listen to it. It's an audio book, and I did the narration of the audio book. It was a lot of fun, and people really write me and tell me how much they enjoy hearing me read my book. So get educated. It can hit any family, and you want to be knowledgeable about this. You want to understand it, even if you don't have a confused individual in your family. You are going to come across this issue where you work, in your community, at your church, what have you, and you need to be informed, and you need to inform others.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's a really strong way to end this. But just before we wrap up, I'd like to ask the guests, since we've been launching this, a sort of a finishing question, and the theme is always rational voices. So I want to end with what do you think is an unpopular opinion, or what you think currently is an unpopular opinion, but you believe should be popular? I think I can guess your one, but what would be like something that you think is an
Oh, there's
unpopular
so
opinion in today's
there's so
culture?
many. There's so many. I don't know where to start. Does it have to be? I mean, on this particular subject?
Entirely up to you. Entirely up to you.
Just randomly off the top of my head, I want young people to know that having children is the most fulfilling, wonderful thing to do with your life. I want young people to know that um, most people, after they've had one child, want to have more. So if you begin having your kids when you're 40, you might be limited in that way. I want people to know that the science uh, behind, the science studying the differences between male and female is massive. There's massive. Every cell in the body that has a nucleus, which is almost every cell, contains that X or XX or XY chromosome. And that has an impact on the functioning of every cell, every organ system, your heart, your brain, your lungs, your skin, everything. Um, and we need to celebrate that, and we need to celebrate those differences. Uh, at the same time, we need to just appreciate the vast uh, options available to all of us in terms of our interests and what we want to do with our lives. There's no one way to be a woman. There's no one way to be a man. We need to celebrate all the different personalities that are out there, and we need to leave the body alone. Leave the body alone. Our bodies are infinitely complex, magnificently awesome uh, creations. And you just don't want to mess around with them because you're going to pay a price. I guess
Oh,
that's just a few things.
well, that's I think, an amazing way to end. Thank you so much for your time today, Miriam.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was